Welcome to the International Online Conference, Creating Stability with Uncertainty, and with us today, Bob Miller and Hope Griffin, teacher from Stonefields School in New Zealand. Hello.
Kia ora.
I'm happy to see you with us in the conference, and we will start with a question that people will understand what you're doing. If you can tell us about your school, what do you think of the guiding principle in the daily life?
For sure. So we are a school of full primary, which means that we run from year 0, new entrants, all the way up to year 8. So that includes an intermediate. We're a modern learning environment school, which means that it's all open plan. We have multiple teachers per per classroom, per hub, as we call it. And that the year groups are usually mixed, so we have multiple years within a particular hub. For example, Hope teaches the year 7-8 learners, but we have a year 5-6 cohort and a 3-4 cohort and a 0-1-2 cohort as well. And we've got about 700 learners now. We're a relatively new school, so we've only been around for about 10 years now. And throughout that time, we've been developing this philosophy of inquiry to improve practice all the time.
So our underlying principles for teaching and learning at Stonefields School involve building knowledge, making meaning, and applying understanding. And that's a process that the learners go through in order to learn.
Great. So if you can tell us a little bit, what were the main challenges for the school community during COVID-19? How did you cope?
I think right from the start, the biggest challenge that we faced was just the speed with which it all happened. So we had a little bit of insight into the fact that it was coming. We weren't the first country with the virus, and we'd seen that it was possibly going to be going into full lockdown, and we were getting daily updates from the news, but there was very, very little time, maybe 2 days between hearing that we were going into lockdown and essentially having to create a system for making it work. So organizing was a huge thing. We pulled together as many resources as we could to send home so that the younger learners would have things to be able to do. We made sure that we could send digital devices home to learners that needed them. So our younger learners didn't have anything to work on, so wouldn't be able to do Zoom meetings or Google Hangouts like we were doing. So trying to get iPads organized for everybody was a real challenge. So there was that side of it, the logistics. And then the other side of it was actually trying to develop a program that was effectively going to work at a distance. And so trying to come up in a short space of time with a philosophy that we felt would work and that we could roll out. So that was our sort of biggest challenge going into it.
What were the main things that help you to overcome these challenges?
Go for it.
Okay. So as Bob started speaking about there, the school developed a philosophy which was based around a third of teacher-led workshops when we were working online. A third of the time was devoted to the learners being able to continue their independent learning away from a teacher, and a third of the time was devoted to the learners being able to enjoy time with their families through our, Bob created a blog where lots of activities including cooking, baking, there were some science activities were all put on there for our learners to enjoy with their families, because we were very aware that every family situation was different, and we wanted to make sure that we were still providing lots of opportunities for learners, but in a way that they could still be with their families during a very stressful time.
And I think one of the important parts of all of this was we developed that idea fairly quickly, that third. We didn't have very much time to come up with it, but once we had decided that's what we were going to be doing, with the idea of there would be activities that the learners could be doing independently, activities that were designed by the teacher. Once we had that in mind, there was an incredible team effort where people knew what their job was, their responsibility. So we had people that were creating online activities, and we're fortunate with our school that there are a number of specialist teachers who really embraced that idea and were able to create ongoing activities for the blogs that were encouraging learners to participate. And it was a participation that learners were uploading to the blog and sharing their learning with other people, which would sort of inspire and encourage and support other learners to do the same. We had this amazing art projects online and music projects that our music teacher put together, which really showed that although we were working in our separate bubbles, we're actually all in it together and we're all working towards the same end. So that side of things was brilliant, and it only really worked because of the I think consistency of the message and the same, we were all pulling together. So that side of things was brilliant, and it only really worked because of the I think consistency of the message and the same, we were all pulling together and we're all working for best intentions for the learners, for the best outcomes for our learners.
So this model that you operate, it stay for the next year that started just a few weeks ago?
So the idea of the third has remained a little bit. So some of the blogs and activities that were there, we really like the idea of learners being able to access and have ongoing access to those blogs, and our specialist teachers have continued to sort of add activities to them over time. So that's something that we're looking to do. But we also have a really useful tool that we use at Stonefields called School Talk. So that's where we upload all of our learning designed for the learners to be able to access. As part of that, we're also putting links to activities that they can do at home or activities that are on the blog to support their or more independent and agentic learning. And that's something that we've been kind of growing towards for a while, trying to promote agency in our learners, and School Talk is a fantastic app which really supports that.
Another aspect that remained after lockdown and some learning that my team and I are continuing now that we're back at school is, as I said, one of those thirds was to give the teachers time to give feedback to the learners, and we found through our student or part of a student voice survey before lockdown and after was that our learners really were benefiting more and enjoying the feedback that they were getting and receiving from their teachers. So now my team and I that I work with continue to devote time to give good quality feedback, and we build that into our program now because we know how much our learners value that.
So do you think that the COVID-19 make a difference in your teaching way or in your school?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like we said at the start, we're always inquiring, we're always iterating to improve. So every opportunity and everything that comes up, we learn from it. And actually, during the lockdown, we conducted surveys on our learners to ask things like, how are you going in terms of your learning, and what challenges are you facing, what are you looking forward to? we also did similar surveys on our staff and our parent community to see what kind of trends and information that we can take from that in order to improve the learning design in the future. So absolutely, we really took the opportunity to try and learn as much as possible. And that has had an effect on how we inquire into our practice, our teaching and learning and assessment cycle. And as Hope was saying, while we always recognize feedback as something important, we, I think, perhaps in some ways underestimated the value of it for certain learners at certain times and in certain forms as well. So we've readjusted and reassessed and make sure we've got enough time to actually do that properly. And I think to put that into, to give it its value and give it its time. Sorry, Hope.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's also given us the opportunity to think differently about feedback that we give. So, for example, we found that we would teach our maths and English workshops at the beginning of the day. And Ollie, who I also work with, we would receive emails from our students asking for feedback. And that's actually continued now that we're back at school. Some of our shyer or more introverted learners will choose to email us rather than, because we're in a hub, as Bob was saying earlier, we're in large hubs of 60 children. And so some children are finding it easier to kind of email us directly with their piece of writing or whatever it might be to get feedback in that way. So it's made us think differently as well.
It seems that in the last few months, a lot of work was done in the school, and it's taken from you a lot of efforts for the teachers. What did you do to manage, you know, the daily efforts also at your home with the children maybe, and also with your student? What were the strengths that you used or qualities that you used to manage this uncertainty?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's funny because if you speak to most people in New Zealand and teachers as well, they look back quite fondly at the time. They look back and they actually quite enjoyed lockdown. It wasn't for a really, really long time. And so I appreciate people in other countries are probably not enjoying it as much. But from our perspective, not having to sit in traffic in the morning and being able to take a break and just go for a walk around the block, take the dogs out. It was really nice to have a somewhat steadier pace of life. And not to say that when we weren't working with the learners, we weren't working very hard, and we had a lot of face-to-face time, a lot of screen time, a lot of extra meetings. So that kind of thing was challenging. And it was, you know, you were spending a lot of time sitting down and staring at a screen, so you could run the risk of getting headaches and things. But to be able to balance that by just getting up and going for a walk and sit outside for a half hour, those were just those little joys that actually you don't necessarily get time to do as much in a regular working week. And it was good. It was good. The interactions with the kids were lovely, and small groups really made a real difference in having that insight into people's lives, getting to meet everyone's pets and that kind of thing from a primary. It was lovely. It was, and everyone was really nice.
And maybe of this balance, did you succeed to take it to your school when you are now at school? Like, you know, make this time off?
Yeah, we all promised we would. We come in and say, yeah, look, we've got this new perspective on life. We're going to make sure that we balance it. It doesn't take long to unfortunately get back into the old ways, and to be, before you know it, you're sitting in traffic again. But yeah, so that's why we all look fondly back at those times when it was a more relaxed pace of life. Yeah. Hope, how did you cope?
Yeah.
I would just add on to Bob to say all of the teachers kind of got together, and every week we would have virtual staff meetings, and so we would have the kind of formal-ish staff meeting, but we would also do informal get-togethers and online quizzes So the morale was really high, and like in some cases we spoke to our staff and to our colleagues much more than we would get the opportunity to back at school. And we also did lots of upskilling and professional development, because lots of people weren't quite sure how to use different apps like Padlet and things that we were using more. So we really supported each other through that. And yeah, as Bob said, we look back on it quite positively. It was a really, it was challenging, but it was a really interesting and exciting time to live through.
Let's go forward a little bit. If you can choose one of the qualities discussed in the conference, we talk about flexibility, surrender, presence, or initiative. And if you could give us an example, how do you think it's manifested in your school and you want to talk about?
I would say for me, it's either flexibility or initiative, but sorry, Hope, you go, you lead. I'll have some thinking time.
I think all of those values are demonstrated at Stonefields, but I would say in regards to COVID-19, definitely flexibility stands out as one quality that we all had to demonstrate. The learners, the parents, community, and the teachers, and we all kind of got behind each other and supported each other through lockdown.
Can you sorry, a little bit, I want to ask Hope about flexibility, because your school is very flexibility in daily life, you know, all the open space. What was the differences of this quality of flexibility? If you can a little bit...
Yeah, you're right. We are already quite a flexible school. But it was a completely different way of working, even though we're used to, we had the benefits of the majority of our learners having devices and being used to working online. It was completely different to see your teacher through a Google Hangout rather than face-to-face, and to communicate in a completely different way. We had nice apps that we could add on to Google Hangouts that lots of the teachers kind of were constantly investigating, so the kids were able to put their hands up or send emojis to their teachers. And so we were constantly being flexible and innovating our practice while all kind of being quite unsure about what would happen next. So like every day was different. But yeah, you're right. We bring those qualities even to physical Stonefields school as well.
And you think that this is where wasn't an advantage, that you are already exercise flexibility, that it's were easier for you to do this in time of uncertainty?
Perhaps it was helpful that we already are a flexible community, but I do think that the third plan that we created as a school could be transferable to many other schools around the world, because I think it was the right balance to give the learners enough independence while still having the teacher facilitating the learning and still having the family involved as well. So I definitely think that that could be transferable to a lot of schools.
Great.
And I think to add on to that a little bit as well, while the teachers are absolutely flexible and the school has that philosophy of iteration and inquiry, we do a lot of work with the learners as well about trying to promote their agency and independence. So they are used to change. They are used to being change as the constant, and to be flexible and ability to adapt is really important. So I think that helped as well in the going into something like this. While it would have been high anxiety for some, probably for the majority, they seem to just take it in their stride. We did have, I think, a little concern going into it about the anxiety that some would face. And so one of the initiatives that we did put in place was to make sure that we could account for every single learner. So we developed a way of tracking the presence of every learner on screen, and then assessing their well-being just on a simple score. So every time they would have an interaction with the teacher, the teacher would just rate the quality of that interaction. So if they felt the child was showing signs of anxiety, they would just make a note of it. And that information was shared with the other teachers that were working with that learner, so that we were all aware of if there was a problem, that we could address it. And also if there was a child that nobody had seen for a few days, they weren't turning up to their workshops online, that we would pick up the telephone and we would speak to the parents and we'd just check in that everything was okay. So within, I think 2 or 3 days, we had a really high, essentially, attendance rate of about 95 to 96%, where we knew and we'd seen and talked to every single one of our learners. And then over the space of whatever it was, the 25 days, I think we were in lockdown, there were some learners who had been there for 100% every single day, but most learners were there for a good 90% of the days. There wasn't anybody who didn't show up at least once or twice on any of those days.
If you can tell me one anecdote that was you will take with your memory from this time.
Yeah, I can start. A highlight for me was every day we would start the day with meeting all 65 of our learners on a big Google Hangout, and it was crazy and it was fun. And the chat, we had a chat function, and the learners would be sending jokes through, and they just all got to say hello to all their friends and their teachers that morning. And then of course we moved into smaller groups, but I'll definitely always remember seeing and hearing from children who at school are not necessarily the loudest, but really coming into their own in the digital environment. And that was definitely a highlight for me during lockdown.
It's a sense of belonging. It's something that very important for each of one of the community.
Yeah, it really was. And you saw a different side to the learners as well that you don't necessarily see in the classroom, in the hub. So there'll be some of our learners that they sort of set it as a personal challenge to wear a different hat every day, or to kind of make sure they were dressed up in a more peculiar way. So they were all trying to outdo each other. So I think have that fun with it, and try and embrace it, and realize that it is a very sort of rare opportunity. Hopefully it will never happen again. But to make the most of it, and to realize that, yeah, we are, although in our separate bubbles, we're all part of the same team, and we are all pulling together. And yeah, we made some really good connections, and probably had richer conversations in some cases than we would have had face-to-face with the learners.
Great. Thank you very much for your insights from New Zealand, from Stonefields School. It was a pleasure for me to be with you today. Thank you very much, and good luck with the next year.
Thank you very much for your time. Kia ora, good luck.
Bye-bye.
Bye.